Testing 1, 2, 3. 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 Testing 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. We'll be starting soon. We're just working through one technical issue. And once that technical issue is hopefully resolved, then we will start the meeting. Good morning, everybody. I think that we've worked through our technical difficulties, so we will proceed with the meeting. So good morning and welcome to the Built Heritage Committee meeting of September 10th, 2024. I'd like to call the members to order. This hybrid meeting is being facilitated through Zoom and is being held on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the original custodians of the unceded land in which the city of Ottawa is located. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. Since this committee meeting is being streamed live on the Ottawa City Council YouTube channel, I'd like to remind participants to please keep your microphones muted until I call upon you to speak. For those participating here in the committee room, please use the microphone in front of you and keep your computer muted. I will provide each committee member with the opportunity to ask questions or comment on each item in the order in which they raise their hand in Zoom. For panelists, the raise hand option is found at the bottom of the participants list. For those calling in, please press *9 to raise your virtual hand. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues. Members are also reminded to submit any motions, visual supports, or declarations of interest in writing to the coordinator at their earliest opportunity. Although the deadlines have passed to register to speak and provide written submissions to this committee, residents can still make written submissions to council. If you have any technical difficulties signing into the meeting, you can contact the committee coordinator. A reminder that if participants are having technical issues with their Zoom connection, they may call in using the backup telephone number provided by the coordinator. I have received regrets from members Legault, Quinn, and Dote. Before we proceed, I will ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call of all members.
Councillor Kelly,
Present.
Member Dote, Member Quinn, Councillor Troster.
Here.
Member Madigan,
Here.
Councillor Leeper,
Sorry, here.
Member Legault, Vice Chair Plante.
Ici.
Chair King.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you so much. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, are the minutes noted on the agenda confirmed? Confirmed, thank you. So I will proceed with a consent agenda this morning. We do have a referral on 50 Carruthers to ensure that the property owner has a chance to address the committee. So we will hold that item. We have items for consideration of objection to the notice of intention to designate 149 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have a number of considerations of objection to the notice of intention to designate. We do have one singular presentation, but I'll proceed with the consent agenda. We will have, I believe, some held items, and we'll be able to take in the whole presentation at that point. But for 149 Rideau Street, we do not have any registered speakers. We did receive correspondence from the clerk's office. Is there any interest on holding this item? Seeing none, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you so much. The next item is consideration of objection to the notice of intention to designate 156 Rideau Street, including street addresses 152, 156, 158 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are no registered speakers. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa. Is there any interest in holding this item? Seeing none, is the item carried? Carried. Thank you so much. The next item is consideration of objection to the notice of intention to designate 198 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are no registered speakers for this item. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa. Is there any interest by committee to hold this item? Seeing none, is the item carried?
Carried.
Thank you. We have as our next item, consideration of objection to the notice of intention to designate 217 Rideau Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We do have a registered speaker, Josiah Firth from the Lowertown Community Association. I understand that he is in support of this specific item. Would you like to speak on this specific item? Okay. I'm sure if we're going to hear from you later, and if you're in general support of this item, we'll be happy to hear those comments later. There are no other registered speakers. We did receive correspondence on this item from Heritage Ottawa. Is there any will amongst committee to hold this item? Seeing none, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you so much. The next item's application to demolish 227, 229, 231, 233, 235, 237 Patrick Street, St. Patrick Street, designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have registered speakers, so we will hold that item. The next item is application to demolish at 7 Crescent Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. There are registered speakers, so we will hold that item. The next item is designation of 200 Fifth Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are no registered speakers. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa. Is there any will by committee to hold this item? Seeing none, is the item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you so much. The next item is designation of 218 Canton Street, 224 MacArthur Avenue, 297 Dupuis Street, and 159, also known as 149 and 381 Montreal Road under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are no registered speakers on this item. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa. Is there any will of committee to anybody on committee to hold this item? Seeing none, is the item carried?
Carried.
And I know we're going quickly through items, but I actually do want to really thank staff for the hard work that they've undertaken on these files. You know, maybe this is testament to the good work in terms of the speed that we're going through some of the items on the agenda, but we do want to note that there was a tremendous amount of work that was undertaken, hundreds of pages of research, and we appreciate the work that's been undertaken. The next item is designation of 123 Metcalfe Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We do have a presentation and registered speakers, so we will hold that item. The next item is Heritage Register Removal Reports. There is no presentation on this item, but we do have Heritage Ottawa registered to speak, so we will hold that item. The next item is updates to the Heritage Grant program for building restoration. There's a presentation if required, and this is a major piece of policy, but it was all before us in our agenda packages. So I don't know if there is interest in holding this item or not. There are no registered speakers. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa. I'm assuming so in terms of the correspondence. I know that Hunter McGill, I think, is here, and I see heads nodding. Sure, absolutely. Councillor Troster.
I just want to thank staff for this, and I'm really happy to see that you specifically mentioned the Bronson Center, which is an example of a heritage building that is owned by nonprofit community organizations, and it is literally falling apart. The stonework is literally falling down, and they need, well, I was very pleased to see that building designated, and I will be very pleased to see them get the support to fix it up, because it's a real eyesore. Thank you. And it's a wonderful building, and the organizations who work within it are wonderful, and they deserve a better home. So thank you.
And I'd also like to thank staff for their hard work. We've had some discussion and deliberation between my office. I know that was as a result of a direction that came from this committee in terms of looking at how to strengthen the tools. Of course, we're not presupposing what council will determine in terms of future budgets, but this is recommendation, and I think it's a strong one and a step in the right direction. So I want to thank staff for all the hard work on the update to the Heritage Grant Program for building restoration. Noting that there are no other questions, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you so much. And the last substantive item is the status update, Built Heritage Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending August 23, 2024. One of the typical pro forma documents that we provide, that are provided to us for review. There's no presentation on this item, no registered speakers. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Thank you so much. So let's go back to our first held item, designation of 50 Carruthers Avenue under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We do have a registered speaker. I know that we had a presentation before in our last meeting, so maybe we can dispense with the presentation and simply hear from the registered speaker, Barbara Nagelli. Thank you so much for joining us, and you have 5 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman King, and good morning, Heritage Committee. Special hello to Jeff Leeper, my counselor. Thank you also for making the time to hear me. I know you have a very firm decision made on the designation of 50 Carruthers, and I can well understand. We have lived there since 1981. We have preserved the home as best we can. And that has been a challenge financially and of course in terms of repairs because everything has to be hand cut. But you will know all of that being a Heritage Committee. So here we are today. And I have two major points that I would like to make. And again, you are probably aware of these, but one is that our location, we are the second property in from the corner. We're also across from where the proposed embassies were at one point going to go. Now, the properties on either side of Carruthers are empty and they are owned by a developer. So I'm flanked by one developer who has been patiently not bothering me for many, many years. So, but the plan is, I think, with the developer is that it will eventually turn into a very high rise. So that's our location. And in terms of the intensification goal of the neighborhood and the city, it flies in the face of intensification to leave the house. Now, in terms of heritage, of course, you want to maintain the house, but I do want you to realize that I'm flanked by these two developers. It's my first point. The second point, and again, you're familiar with this, the house is suddenly old. And it got old rather rapidly when the high rises on Parkdale were built. And we had no idea this was going to happen. We just thought they're 2 blocks away. They're going up there. But when the blasting happened, there must be some kind of a fault zone. I'd be standing in the kitchen. The entire house would tremble. And so then after that, the doors wouldn't open and they get stuck part way. There are windows that are cracked and there's cracks in the plaster. So the damage happened in relation to the construction on Parkdale. Now, had I even anticipated that, I would have had an engineering report done before and after, but I didn't think about that. So here we are today. The house has now got even more health problems than it did prior to that. I mean, one of the main problems, of course, is the rotting wood on the 3rd floor and the rotting wood on the upright pillars that holds the 2 wraparound verandas. So we keep painting and painting and painting, but if you were to take a knitting needle and poke it, you would find a lot of osteoporosis in this house. So I feel the house is unwell at this point, which is not a good feeling for a home. And now the Heritage Committee is stepping in and giving a designation. So that means that it either is going to have, it's going to have a lot of repairs. It's going to have major repairs. Now, or at some point, it's going to need to be torn down. That's not my worry because I'm of a certain vintage. But I do want you to be aware of the health status of this particular home. I think those are the main 2 points, and I'm quite open to answering any questions if you have any.
Appreciate your comments, and Vice Chair Plant has some questions for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for your delegation. I admit I don't know that area of town well, so I just Googled where your house is, and it's absolutely stunning and beautiful, and it's very clear that you've taken good care of it. I was just wondering, because you talked about there was no engineer report before or after. If you could just go back, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
I would have had before the Parkdale apartments went up, and that it was agreed to 28 floors. The first one went up, it was over 30 floors. The second one's gone up, it's, I don't know, 34, however many floors it is. I would have had a report done because before and after, because it would show the damage. It would show that. And I know that from a previous claim some years ago when the building that is now Ottawa Housing went up. I did get insurance compensation because I had the information available.
Thank you very much. And thanks for taking care of our heritage homes. We appreciate it.
Councillor Lieber.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Barbara, I don't have any real questions for you. I just want to say thank you for your persistence in asking to speak to this committee, and I'm glad that we were able to make this opportunity available to you today. And you know, I have strong feelings with respect to the need to preserve some of Mechanicsville's history. Your neighborhood is changing very fast. It's gentrifying very fast. The turnover is only going to accelerate in the coming years. I can only imagine what's going to happen when the senators move to, or if they move to LeBreton Flats and the desirability of your neighborhood. So I do think it's important to preserve some of this. And, you know, I can only reiterate that this committee probably says 10 times every term, which is that the heritage protection is important and we are all committed to it. But without the tools and the financial resources to owners, I absolutely recognize that it's putting you in a diminished circumstance. So it is not without awareness of that challenge that I'm voting today to extend that protection to the House. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for providing your delegation. We really appreciate it. We appreciate all the work that you're doing and investing in your property, and we appreciate the challenges around designation. But the report does note that it does meet 5 of the 9 criteria of designation. And so at this point, are there any questions to staff by any of the committee members? Okay, Councillor Troster.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'm just wondering, my question to staff is, when this, you know, assuming this property will be designated, will this give access to potential funding sources for the homeowner to maintain the property? Does that provide more options?
Good morning. The owner would certainly be eligible for the Heritage Grant Program and could phase projects every 2 years as they're eligible for that.
And approximately how much money would a homeowner be able to access? I guess it depends on the project, but what would the ceiling be?
The ceiling per application would be 10,000. Yeah.
I recognize that that's a small amount of money on a heritage home that needs a lot of work, but that's good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Is the report carried? Carried. Thank you so much. This report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on September 18th for consideration, as well as all the consideration of objections to the notice of intentions that we had approved. We'll now move to the next item, application to demolish 227, 229, 231, 233, and 235, 237 St. Patrick Street. And we have a presentation from staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'll just wait for the slides to come up on the screen.
So I know we are waiting for the other presentation in the room, but we do, I've been notified that we have the presentation in both languages online. So if you want to proceed,
Perfect.
you can.
Thank you. I couldn't tell that from here. So good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As you've noted, this is an application to demolish 3 properties in the Lowertown West Heritage Conservation District located at 227 to 229, 231 to 233, and 235 to 237 St. Patrick Street. Next slide, please. The properties are located on the north side of St. Patrick Street, right at the boundary of the Lowertown West Heritage Conservation District. They are located just west of Dalhousie Street and are 3 properties adjacent to each other. They all represent the early vernacular residential architecture of Ottawa. Next slide, please. 227 to 229 St. Patrick Street is a 3-story side gable structure with dormer windows, 2-story balconies and a carriageway. The building was constructed circa 1877 with wood cladding. However, the cladding has been changed to stucco and angel stone. The building is immediately adjacent to a flat roof 3-story building to the west that is not proposed for demolition. You can see the red brick building here just at the edge of this photo. Next slide, please. 231 to 233 St. Patrick Street is immediately to the east of 227 to 229. There is no space between the buildings. The building was constructed as a semi-detached house in the late 19th century and is a 2.5-story side gable form with a full veranda. Well, all 3 of these buildings are very common vernacular typologies in the Lowertown West Heritage Conservation District. Next slide, please. The 3rd building proposed for demolition today is the building at 235 to 237 St. Patrick Street. It's located 1 lot west of Dalhousie Street. It's the oldest of the 3 buildings, constructed sometime between 1851 and 1872. It's a flat-roofed, semi-detached form that was originally clad in wood and later replaced with concrete block on the front facade and pressed tin on the side elevations. Next slide, please. These images show the buildings as part of the St. Patrick Street streetscape. Again, you're looking at the north side of the street. Despite their condition and alterations, these buildings are representative examples of the 19th century built form and historic character of Lowertown, which is Ottawa's earliest settler neighborhood. Next slide, please. These images are looking east towards the properties, again along St. Patrick Street. You can see again that despite their condition, they do form part of that historic streetscape. Next slide. Thank you. So in terms of application background, these 3 properties have been the subject of ongoing discussions between city staff in various departments and the property owner. The properties are currently vacant and have become problematic properties with over 75 calls to bylaw and regulatory services for a variety of issues. The properties are frequently broken into. In October 2023, the city issued a property standards order requiring the owner to obtain an engineer's report related to the structural stability of these 3 buildings. The owner submitted a brief report, which is attached to the staff report, related to all 3 properties, but it did not include a review of all areas of the buildings as part of the review. The conclusion of this report was that the existing buildings were in poor condition and would be too costly to repair or rehabilitate. The report recommended that new construction on the site would be a lower cost option that would meet today's building code. Through the remainder of 2024 and remainder of 2023 and early 2024, Heritage Planning staff had several meetings with the property owner and his agents and noted that the report prepared by the owner's engineer was not sufficient for professional Heritage Planning staff to make a recommendation related to demolition to this committee or council. In addition, staff provided the owner with the information required to make an application under the Heritage Act for demolition, as the authority to make a decision on such applications lies with council after consultation with BHC and not staff. Beginning in January 2024, as a means of moving this file forward, staff suggested that the city hire an engineer to peer review the owner's report and review the condition of the buildings with consideration to their heritage value and their potential for rehabilitation as important buildings in the Lowertown West Heritage Conservation District. This is an uncommon practice, but has been taken in other instances of challenging properties where staff require additional professional expertise in order to provide sound professional advice to committee and council. In April of 2024, the property owner submitted an application for demolition under the Building Code Act. The chief building official determined that there were 3 items required in advance of issuance of the demolition permits. The first was approval or exemption from the demolition control bylaw, utility clearances, so ensuring that all utilities were cut off before demolition took place, and permission under the Ontario Heritage Act. As a means of resolving the issues related to the demolition permit and the heritage permit, city staff worked with the property owner through their lawyer to select a mutually agreed upon engineering firm with expertise in historic buildings to conduct a more thorough review of the buildings and their potential for rehabilitation. In July 2024, the city engaged Capacity Engineering Limited, a local firm with the required experience to undertake this work. I do have Mr. Maurice Quinn here with me today to answer any questions the committee may have at the end of this presentation. Mr. Quinn's reports were submitted to the city near the end of July and are attached as supporting documents to this staff report. The owner made an application to demolish the 3 buildings under the Ontario Heritage Act in August of 2024. On September 4th, so just last week, City Council approved a motion to waive the required application fees under the Ontario Heritage Act for this file in order to avoid the prospect of litigation. Next slide, please. So I'll now provide a brief overview of the 3 reports prepared by Capacity Engineering. As I mentioned, these reports are attached to the staff report as documents 6, 7, and 8. So the first report is related to 227 to 229 St. Patrick Street. The findings of the report are that this property is in overall very poor condition, with particular reference to significant structural deficiencies with the exterior walls and the foundation. The conclusion of the report states, and this is a quote, "We are concerned that the advanced state of deterioration, significant damage to the interior linings, and evidence of buckling of the exterior walls are all indications of early onset structural collapse. The structure is now past saving and in fact may pose a danger to the unsuspecting public if permitted to weather another winter season. We recommend the structure be demolished without delay." Next slide, please. The second report is for 231 to 233 St. Patrick Street. Again, this report observes that the overall condition of this building is very poor and has specific reference to the foundation and the ground floor framing. The conclusion of the report states, "Unfortunately, the past changes to the structure make restoration likely impossible, and the current condition precludes preservation. It is our recommendation that, owing to the changes to the fabric and materials of the structure, and given that the deterioration is extensive, as well as the difficulty in preserving the structure with adjacent demolition works to take place, that demolition be approved." Next slide, please. Finally, the report related to 235 and 237 St. Patrick Street. The overall condition of this building is also very poor, with reference to the unique plank on edge structure and the front facade, which appears to be detaching from the main structure. The conclusion of this report states, "Considering the state of critical structural elements within the subject property, and more specifically, the significant and advancing state of the plank on edge primary structure, preservation of the structure is not possible. Restoration of the building would be prohibitively difficult, with the sourcing of necessary timbers and other period materials being challenging at best. Rehabilitation of the structure is likely possible. However, it is our professional opinion that significant and necessary maintenance has been neglected in this structure." In addition, this report also suggests that elements of the front facade could be salvaged for reincorporation into a new development on the site. Staff do encourage the property owner to consider this option as part of the demolition process if council approves this permit, but do not recommend that council require it through a condition of approval. Next slide, please. So in terms of the policy framework for these applications, as noted earlier, the properties are located in the Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District, which was originally designated by the City of Ottawa in 1994. So these properties have been designated for 30 years. There is no HCD plan for this HCD for the purposes of the Ontario Heritage Act. One is expected to be under consideration by this committee at the next meeting, a new plan. However, at the time of designation, City Council did adopt the Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District study and guidelines. And the document does have guidelines related to demolition, which basically says that generally demolition of properties that contribute to the overall cultural heritage value of the district will not be recommended for approval by council. I think you will see through the staff recommendation here that this is not a generally a normal situation. These buildings are in extreme state of poor condition, and unfortunately, staff are in a position where we will be recommending demolition be approved. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the final piece of my presentation, which is the staff recommendations. Staff are recommending that committee recommend that council approve the application to demolish, conditional upon the owner entering into an agreement with the city to be registered on title to landscape and maintain the property until such a time that new construction is proposed. This committee will be familiar with the fact that generally, applications for demolition are accompanied by an application for new construction. And in this instance, given the condition of the buildings and the ongoing challenges associated with them from other departments within the city, staff are recommending that the demolition be approved in the absence of an application for new construction. That being said, any new construction on this site in the future will require another heritage permit and will require approval by this consideration by this committee and approval by the city council, and would have to either comply with the guidelines in the Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District study as it currently stands, or if the new Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District plan is approved and enacted by council by way of bylaw, then those new guidelines would apply. The second recommendation of this report is to exempt the property from the requirements of the demolition control bylaw for essentially the same reasons that I just outlined on the heritage permit. That is all I have to say on this file. If committee members have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And as I said, I have Mr. Quinn here with me. I also have on the line staff from Building Code Services, Bylaw and Regulatory Services, and legal staff are here as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We did receive correspondence on this item from Heritage Ottawa as well as a resident, and we do have 3 registered speakers today. The first being Janet Thompson-Marr.
Is it okay to put it down? Just almost done. Oops, no, oops.
Just leave.
Well, all right, sorry about that.
Thank you for joining us, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for the chance to speak with you today about this matter. Just for reference, my house, where I've lived for over 15 years, backs directly onto these properties. But before I go further, I just want to say I live in a heritage neighborhood because I love heritage areas. And before I lived where I live now, I lived 2 doors from the Governor General's in a heritage home for a long time. Prior to that, in Old Ottawa South, in a downtown neighborhood, in a home in Toronto. I love heritage neighborhoods. My daughter, who grew up in those homes, recently bought a home on St. Andrew in Lower Town West. So this isn't about concern about heritage homes, but I do want to speak to you about some things that I think are relevant and important here. As I mentioned, my house backs directly onto these properties, and I, along with several of my neighbors, have a very direct view of what's gone on there over the last several years. Other people who are our neighbors have dealt with the issues from there in many ways as well as not having a direct view. The social disorder there has been extreme, and it continues until today. Yesterday, a bylaw officer spent an entire day reboarding those buildings, which were boarded last week again. So that's just from the weekend. But that's not for you guys, I understand that. During the last year or so, though, my neighbors and I have come to know the owner, Brian Dagenet, and through him to get a bit of an understanding of the condition of those buildings and of the challenges he's faced in dealing with the situation that he's found himself in there. And how he's conducted himself in dealing with those challenges. And I say this as someone who has had my life significantly negatively impacted by what's happened there. Brian Dagenet is not a bad actor in this. I just need to say that. We've dealt with him a lot. My neighbors funnel through me mostly their concerns about those properties when they see and hear and experience what's going on, so that not everybody reaches out to Brian. And so even on vacation, unfortunately, I've been dealing with this. And he's very responsive. He arrives immediately. He deals with things. He's tried his best. Have there been mistakes there? I mean, I think if you asked him and he looked back, he would never have bought those properties. I think we can say this without any doubt, but that's not the situation that we have. He's a good person. He's done his best. If there are any questions around all of that, I'm happy to speak to them. But what I really want to speak about here today, Brian's received criticism from some people who don't live in the immediate neighborhood. They don't know. And of course, everyone is entitled to their opinion. But when those opinions aren't supported by the facts, they're really just opinions. So what are the facts that we've been given them by the experts who have had a chance to look at those properties? And we've heard from staff today, and we've presumably all read the reports. I mean, to the question of, has there been demolition by neglect there? Yeah, well, most certainly there has. 2 firms, 10 months apart, both told us that those buildings have been in an advancing state of deterioration for decades. Right? There have been things done in those buildings that should never have been allowed to happen. And there was work not done to rectify that. As a result, we're seeing their demolition be recommended. But to the question of whether the demolition by neglect was by Brian Dagenet, I think almost certainly no. 2 different engineering firms whose engineers have professional designations, professional standards to meet, professional reputations to maintain, both tell us that the deterioration there has been going on for decades. So we have no reason whatsoever to believe other than what they're telling us about those structures. Brian Dagenet bought those properties in late 2019 and early 2020, leading into COVID. Yes, there have been untold problems of social disorder, and the outward appearance of those properties for sure has deteriorated a lot. They're covered in graffiti. The insides are a terrible mess. They've been repaired multiple times. But if you look at photos of what they looked like when he rented them to people, they did not look terrible. Unfortunately, there has been a serious problem with the clients who have been there. We've all lived it. He did not have an ability to go to the landlord and tenant board over those clients because there is an intermediary between him and the clients that precludes him from being able to do that. So the social disorder that he tried to deal with the best he could is a shared responsibility at best, not just his. So I'm just going to quote quickly from Christopher Hitchens, who famously said, "What can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence." But I think here we actually have evidence that some opinions aren't valid about Brian. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear from me in this. And on behalf of all of my neighbors and myself, we really appreciate staff and all of you for moving this forward. We all want heritage sensitive construction on those sites. Nobody is in favor of tearing down heritage buildings, but the status of what has happened there and what continues to happen, despite the fact that they have not been tenanted for months. They are certainly occupied most of the time, unfortunately. And we have winter coming. There are no services in those buildings. And it's cold. And the next thing we're going to have are people trying to stay warm with fires. And we had on gig by Perrin a few weeks ago, a similar situation where a building has been vacant for a long time, a heritage building, top of your heritage watch list. And someone was in it and started a fire, and the building is substantially burned. Somebody's home next door are burned. These buildings are close to a lot of other people. Everybody is pretty concerned. So I leave you with that, and I thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you for your delegation, and you do have a question or questions from Vice Chair Plante.
Okay.
Hi, Janet. Thanks so
Hi.
much for being here. I just have a couple quick questions. So you talked about how you're sort of the main point of contact for the residents. I'm assuming you mean with my office with city staff and Brian.
Yeah, Brian, yeah.
Pardon?
Yes.
Yes.
You guys
Okay.
and Brian.
So how many hours a week would you say that you spend on this file?
Oh, wow. Well, if we average it out, 10, 15.
So it's like a part-time job, right? Okay. When you talked about living in the heritage district, you said both your building is also a heritage building,
Yes.
correct, that you currently live in?
Yes.
And would you say that the heritage designation and the heritage vibe and the feel is creating a good thing in the community, or is it?
It absolutely is. I mean,
Right.
let me say, to be completely clear, my house has a heritage foundation, and it was reconstructed in the form, with approvals, I guess, as a redevelopment by the regional group 15, 20 years ago, where they did some infill in behind intensification. But my house and my next door neighbor's house, which were part of that property package, they still seem to have a heritage designation, which is fully fair, but they are not the original construction. They are a replication of that, I guess, which is, I guess, what will happen presumably on the property behind.
And what would you like to see based on your experience going forward, so we can both better promote and protect heritage, and not end up in this similar
Yeah.
situation?
I mean, obviously, a lot of people have spent a lot of time thinking about that recently in the neighborhood, and I'm sure staff have spent their careers thinking about this. Yeah, just designating something heritage isn't helping, right? It just isn't helping, because there are so many people who look after those properties beautifully and lovingly and have the money to do it. And then there are the people who don't look after them because they want demolition by neglect. But in the middle, there's a large group of people who just can't afford to look after those homes. You only need to look on my street. You walk the 5 or 6 streets between there and Sussex as it goes around, there are dozens of homes that are so close to what happened on St. Patrick's Street. And it's hard to believe that those people are all doing this as bad actors. Those people are doing it because they don't have the funds to look after it. And I don't know whose decision it is, and I don't know where the policy changes on this. And, you know, I'm not sneering at $10,000 every 2 years, but wow, that does not go very far. I had my own front porch, which is not even large, fixed and repainted this year. And we were talking $5,000 for a small porch, which wasn't in bad condition to be, so $10,000 every 2 years is not saving those houses. And this is, unfortunately, I think, an issue that you're going to see over and over again. And I can't speak to other areas because I don't walk my dog through them as frequently, but I will say that in that neighborhood, if you just did an inventory driving up and down the streets yourselves, you will see that there is like a tsunami of these things coming at you. And I don't know how people fix that. I don't know how they deal with it. I want it fixed. I want it saved, but I don't know where this mythical person is who's coming to buy these properties and put that money into them at this point in time. A few, yes, for sure, but not all of them. So I don't know. That sounds depressing. I'm sorry, but that's, if you walk around, that's kind of the feel you get. So.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for coming today. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for that little block. I know the neighbors are very reliant on you. I know my office is very reliant on you as well. So
well, if you watch the things out
here.
your back windows, both my kitchen and the principal bedroom have 2 windows facing out onto that property. So there's really little option but to do something.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much for your delegation. The next registered speaker is Josiah Firth.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come comment on the heritage permit application for the demolition of these 3 St. Patrick properties. For some time, the LCA has watched with concern the deterioration of these properties, all contributing buildings within the Lower Town West Heritage Conservation District. Constructed between 1851 and 1878, they are amongst the oldest in the district with compelling histories. Their demolition by neglect is a huge loss for Ottawa. The Capacity Engineering Limited reports executed for the city noted that the condition of these buildings at the time of 1990 heritage evaluation was excellent. Yet tragically, some 30 years later, the firm concluded that their retention is not feasible and their condition warrants demolition. We do not contest CL's conclusions, but we hope this committee will take note of its explanation of how demolition by neglect happens and decide to develop a more effective response to prevent such demolitions in the future. The CEL reports portray a process of cumulative neglect attributing to the conditions of 235 to 237 St. Patrick to a do-nothing approach to maintenance, upkeep, occupancy, and use, which has been adopted continually for an extended period of time. A process of deterioration which appears to have greatly accelerated under recent ownership. It further advises that, quote, such structures require the early and aggressive intervention of owners and authorities having jurisdiction so as to prevent their loss. That we are now facing the demolition of 3 significant buildings can only mean that interventions by owners and the City of Ottawa authorities have been woefully inadequate. Clearly, interventions by the City of Ottawa were not sufficiently aggressive nor effective. There is even some question whether any of these 3 properties ever appeared on the city's heritage watch list. Bylaw enforcement has been woefully inadequate and ineffective in preserving these valuable heritage properties. This may be partly attributable to the fact that bylaw officers usually only observe the exterior condition of heritage buildings. Sadly, the result, the likely demolition of not 1, but 3 contributing heritage buildings, continues a decades-long process of neglect and destruction of Lowertown's built heritage. It is no exaggeration to conclude that the loss of 3 more buildings through demolition by neglect in the very heart of the Lowertown West Heritage Conservation District raises questions about the district's long-term viability. Some committee members may not see these demolitions as a great loss, but these cases come up every year. When visitors come to Ottawa, they are looking to experience its history. Unfortunately, more and more of this history is disappearing because of the inadequacy of means, will, and effort to preserve it. Those of us living in Lowertown see these losses as the result of relentless pressure by some property owners and developers to demolish Lowertown's built heritage for profit. Year after year, we are experiencing a steady erosion of the historic character of our neighborhood, the original Bytown. While other cities take heritage conservation seriously, the City of Ottawa and province of Ontario fall short. This is unfortunate because the loss of heritage areas comes with the loss of heritage areas comes the loss of economic and commercial value that otherwise flows through properly managed and intact heritage conservation district. The demolition of these 3 heritage buildings should be a wake-up call to the city's Built Heritage Committee. They point strongly to the need for significant and urgent changes to the city use of city authority to prevent similar outcomes for other heritage structures now in danger. The city's response should make it clear that there must be consequences for demolition by neglect, as well as more effective measures to encourage owners to address ongoing neglect. The Built Heritage Committee needs to consider better carrots and better sticks. Heritage Ottawa has proposed a number of options for the city over the years, including an emergency heritage preservation protocol to facilitate rapid response and cooperation among relevant city officials and departments, as well as community involvement. B, a roster of qualified heritage consultants able to develop preservation options paired with a budget to enable the city to carry out emergency studies, protection and stabilization. C, acquiring the legal ability to do work and charge the cost back as a lien on the property, making these interventions revenue neutral. D, developing a strategy for the monitoring and enforcing property standards of vacant heritage buildings using a now disbanded Mayor's Heritage Matters Task Force to issue work orders when necessary. And E, increase funding for the Heritage Grant Program for building restoration and developing a more flexible heritage property tax relief program than the current community improvement plan to offer tax incentives for owners to invest in their heritage properties. One of the other novel approaches which we urge the Built Heritage Committee to consider is establishing stringent requirements for the new buildings that would replace those demolished by neglect. At a minimum, these new buildings should be designed to reflect the characteristics of the original, allowing for appropriate intensification within the Heritage Conservation District. For example, a requirement to reconstruct replicas of demolished heritage buildings, or at least their facades, within any new development. This would at least provide a somewhat satisfactory replacement building in the Heritage Conservation District, and owners would learn that negligence does not pay. Such action would help ensure long-term viability of the Lowertown Heritage Conservation District, prevent the inexorable and permanent disappearance of this vital cultural and historic district over the next few decades. We also note that the city has only set out few conditions for the demolition, including landscaping the properties, prohibit the use of the properties for other interim uses, and maintain the property in accordance with property standards.
Thank you so much for your delegation. We do have some questions for you, starting with Vice Chair Plante.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned in your comments that other cities are doing things differently. What would you say, what is the most important thing you've taken away from looking at other cities?
I think it's really, well, I mean, other cities are taking it seriously. We really don't appear to be taking this very seriously. These things come up and they go away. I've yet to see one example, with the exception of the Our Lady School, where the city has stood its ground on this type of a thing. And yeah, I mean, the city's policies haven't worked in that situation either. So clearly we are, whatever we're doing is woefully inadequate, and we need to try something else.
If I have a question for staff, is that at the end? Yeah, okay, right.
Councillor Troster.
Hi, thanks for
sorry.
being here. Actually, Councillor Plant asked my question, but I'll tell you, I represent Somerset Ward. We have a few egregious examples of similar properties, and it is incredibly frustrating also to see that in a fit of desperation, sometimes we waive fees, which end up benefiting potential bad actors who have allowed their properties to deteriorate. So I just want to let you know, I am also frustrated, and people, they're constantly asking about Somerset House, for example, and why don't you expropriate? Why don't you do this? Why and it's very tricky to figure out how to intervene in those cases. We also have, as you also know, properties owned by foreign embassies that are also being left to rot. It's a real blight on the downtown core, and it really contravenes our heritage policies. So, I look forward to working with staff. I'm going to take a close look at your recommendations, because I think we have to figure out how to do better with this, because to end up in this place is so unfortunate. And I don't think anyone's disputing that these properties need to come down now, but they didn't have to come down a few years ago, and they didn't just fall apart on their own.
My own house is the same age as these properties. It's in immaculate shape, and I bought it 25 years ago.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we also have a question from Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. You raised a number of good points about how these properties came to the state they are, and the point that we're looking at approving demolition. I'm not sure if you mentioned that losing the properties loses, low rental property. Is that part of the loss to the community as well, as having, the diversity of people, the opportunity to rent in a historic district?
Yeah, well, but it's also, so when I bought my property, I was 23 years old. The Byward Market was the most affordable place for me to buy a house. And I think that still holds today. We could be looking at a totally different demographic moving into the Byward Market if these houses were up for sale to regular people and not exchanged between landlords. It would be a really big boon for us.
You raised a point
for the
there.
community.
When you bought the house, was it in comparable state to the houses we're looking at today to demolish?
Well, according to their report from back in the 90s, yeah, it was in exactly the same state. It was excellent. It was old, but
And have you invested copious amounts of money into the house?
Replace roof, fix foundation. Yeah, I've done a lot of work to my house.
Is
over
it more
25
unusual for these type of houses like other owners?
No. But my father built and restored heritage properties on both coasts of Canada and in Bermuda. So there needs to be more education about what it takes to buy and maintain a heritage property. And the real estate agents aren't helping the situation. They just want to see things sold, and they will tell prospective buyers whatever they want to hear as it concerns heritage properties. So that's one aspect. We also have issues with building inspectors, regular property buyers, like people who are looking for homes, can't buy heritage homes because building inspectors will fail them. But people can buy investment properties without being inspected and then blame, somebody else for the deterioration of their property. So it's really like we need some better experts, especially when these properties are changing hands. It would be really helpful, I think, if we took the same approach to heritage properties as we do to use automobiles. They all need to be inspected when they change hands by a third party and conditions rectified before they are permitted to have somebody live in them. We can do exactly the same thing with heritage properties. It's not going to do a great deal for the housing values, but it will do a lot for heritage.
Yeah, one last question. I guess in maintaining your house, you had to make choices between this year, maybe I can't go on that long distance vacation because I got to put a roof on the house.
Yeah, I mean, like has been said before, the $10,000 is woefully inadequate for any kind of, especially heritage work. I mean, you can get your house painted and maybe trim painted for that much these days. You know, I have a brick building, tuck pointing, getting the proper masons to do it, you know, who actually understand about mortar from back in those days and things like that. These workers are dwindling and they're expensive. And we have really no greater access or help in hiring them.
Thank you for delegation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation. Very informative. And, you know, I think it provides us some food for thought in terms of the trajectory of the policies that we apply to heritage. I can say that there has been a revised bylaw, as you might know, in November 2022. We see this as a start of a process so that we can deal better with vacant properties, requiring an annual permit, being more proactive with inspections. That was only just a scant 2 years ago, but there's much more work that needs to be done. I think we would all acknowledge this around the table. Council most likely would acknowledge that. And we're going to be committed to looking at ways that we can improve our heritage policies. And I think that the submission that you provided is a good first step for a discussion so that we can ensure that we go in a better trajectory. So I do want to thank you for the very thoughtful delegation that you provided to this committee.
Yeah. Thanks to the committee. Thanks, staff.
Thank you. The last registered speaker is Crystal McConaughey.
Just want to test out my camera to make sure everyone can see and hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I am the counsel for the owners of the properties at issue today. My comments will be brief. I do want to thank Ms. Collins for her presentation today. The city's legal department and the Heritage Group do understand that we do not agree with their interpretation of the law as it relates to the enforceability of a pre-2005 heritage study, but for the purposes of the hearing this morning, we are prepared to support the staff report and thank them for their work throughout.
Thank you so much for your comments. Are there any questions for the delegation? I see that Councillor Leeper has a question for you.
Thank you very much. I'm not a lawyer. You continue to disagree with the city interpretation. If we didn't go down this path today, what would that path look like for your clients in terms of a resolution? What would you be seeking?
At this point in time, there are essentially two issues, and I won't get into too much detail. I know that we only have a brief amount of time, and we've gone over this with staff at the city already. The first is the applicability of a 2005 heritage study, which in this case was brought in much before the 2005 Ontario Heritage Act regime. And so it would be in some ways potentially an avenue to go forward to get a declaration from the court that it wouldn't be applicable, and therefore the permit process would go through without engaging heritage at all. And there are also some concerns about the applicability of the Heritage Act in a situation where it is actually the city's bylaw and services who have brought an order for this property, concerned about whether or not it is structurally sound, or these properties.
So it's a court process as opposed to a tribunal process that you'd be pursuing?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And there are also questions from Vice Chair Blount.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm going to pose the same question to staff, but I'll start with you. Is your client open to retaining some of the facades of the original building in any sort of reconstruction or future developments?
At this point in time, we are standing behind the staff report. The staff have said that there is the potential for one wall, but they're not recommending it as a condition in this circumstance.
But is your client amenable to potentially rebuilding it under a similar or facade?
I can't speak to the future. I do know that any permit that would have to come through, if it's coming through Heritage, would again have to be approved, and it would certainly have to adhere to those features, those heritage features, if it were to come through the Heritage process.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you for your delegation. We appreciate it. Questions to staff. Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just want to register my profound discomfort with approving a demolition permit without a clear plan moving forward. I mean, there's a reason we have these policies. I just want to clarify a few things. The ban on interim uses, would that include banning parking for both commercial and personal use?
Yes, it would.
Good, thank you. And if the owner were to apply for a change to the conditions of the permit, would that also come back to Built Heritage Committee, or would it remain at the staff level?
I think it would depend on what the parameters of the change are, but likely it would come back to this committee.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of interim use parking lots that outlive their zoning exemption, and it's just a blot on the downtown core. I mean, we want housing or green space. We don't want more surface parking lots, and our policies are very clear. And that's why, generally speaking, we don't allow demolition unless there's a plan to rebuild. That's very, very clear. I understand that these properties are in exceptionally bad shape. I have a number in my ward that I would like to see come down to. I understand the urgency, but, you know, I would just really question the notion that the property owner has no responsibility here for the decay of these buildings. I mean, he's owned them for several years. When you purchase a property, it's your responsibility to take care of them. And I have to say, it pains me to see that we're waiving the demolition fees. Like to me, this seems profoundly unjust. Again, if this is what staff is recommending and what the chair of this committee is recommending and the ward councillor, I'm willing to go with it, but I don't like the precedent that this sets. I think it allows bad actors to allow their properties to decay and then be financially rewarded for doing so because they're not paying for the demolition permit. And that's really, really frustrating. Just one more question. If residents were to see the demolished lots being used as parking, could they call 311 to report a violation of their permit?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I understand we're in an incredibly tough position at the end of the day. You know, I have properties in my own ward where there's individual squatting, where there's been fires, where there's even been deaths in those buildings. I do know that at some point these properties become so hazardous, we have no choice but to empower them to come down. But it is also enormously frustrating to see the owner financially benefit, right? Because like we are not charging him a fee that we would normally charge him. And I really dispute the idea that he has no role to play. He had no role to play in the decay of these properties. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Vice Chair Plante.
Thank you. I'm just going to pose a similar question to what I posed to legal counsel. So when, I understand it's in a heritage district, but when there is a permit to rebuild on that site, and as Councillor Troster said, we need housing, so we welcome that. What are the parameters in a heritage conservation district? Like, what does that mean concretely? Will they have to do copy paste what they had before, similar? Like, what are the parameters around that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no specifics in terms of reconstructing what's there. Staff are not recommending that as part of this heritage permit. If this committee and council have specifics that they would like to see included, I think, and I would defer to legal counsel to confirm that I'm correct here, but I believe they could be included as conditions of the demolition permit. Ms. Enta?
That is correct, Chair.
And in the absence of that, if I can just continue for one moment, if this committee does not require any specific conditions related to these properties, then the new construction, whatever it is, whenever it is, would be required to comply with the policy framework that's in place at the time of the application. So whether that's the current Heritage Conservation District guidelines, which talk about compatibility, in a sort of more general sense, or the upcoming new Heritage Conservation District plan, which will include policies and guidelines related to new construction in the district. And again, I think it would depend on if they are proposing 3 new buildings, 1 new building, 2 new buildings. I don't, there really isn't a plan at this point, as far as I'm aware.
So would staff, and I'm not sure if we would go through this through our legal counsel, would they be open to just a friendly amendment that they do consult with the previous iteration of the home and the new iteration of the new build? Sorry if that doesn't make sense, but will there be a discussion around keeping sort of how it looked previously in the whatever comes in the future? Sorry if that doesn't make sense, but could that be something we add to the motion today?
I think if that's something that the committee is interested in, we could help prepare something to that effect.
I would like that, please.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Plante. Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate all the work the staff's done on all the files, and including this one. This file in particular, I'm seeing as a bit of a failure of the system. How can we let houses, which are rental houses, deteriorate over quite a long time, and people still living in them, and then we leave the houses, get to the point that they're a danger to the public as well, walking by? Isn't there a mechanism within the system, like not within the heritage section, but bylaw enforcement, to obligate repairs and maintenance of the buildings to bring them up to safety standards?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I do have Jen Thurkelson from Bylaw and Regulatory Services on the line. She may be able to help me with answering this question, but I'll start. I think in the instance of these properties, from a heritage perspective, these properties were not on the heritage watch list because they have not actually been vacant for very long. I think Bylaw and Regulatory Services staff may be able to speak a bit more to any ongoing property standards issues on these properties over time. I think Jen is there on the screen there now.
Thank you for the question, through Mr. Chair. Absolutely, as Leslie indicated, a vacancy is somewhat recent at these locations, at all the properties. In terms of the question in our enforcement mechanisms, they are in place. The difficulty, as noted through some of the speakers as well, has been the continual, even when it was vacant, the break-in. So that could, to speak volume in terms of the report, I mean, we've had over 50 calls for service at this location. So yes, there is mechanisms in place. There's absolutely, we are attending as quickly and as swiftly as we can. But the bigger piece in terms of the safety concern would be what we call the board up. So that's the break-in. So where through us or through the property owner, we would facilitate that securing of the property, but then you turn around and no sooner drive away or go up the street and then it'd be broken into again. So to answer your question, yes, there are mechanisms in place. We have taken severe enforcement actions against this property owner as well. I will reiterate add that to the file as well, in terms of we do have ongoing court summonses and prosecutions before the courts currently in relation to this owner.
Thank you for that feedback. Some additional comments. I feel like this is a great loss to the district and also here in general for the city. One of the properties possibly predates Confederation. The 3 properties together contribute to the historic evolution and history of the district. I think the options have not been fully explored, like whether obliging the owners to rebuild in a similar manner, similar massing, similar appearance, retaining aspects of the buildings to reintegrate with the rebuilding there. I can see what would happen is that when a property gets developed, the developers will most likely try to maximize, go beyond zoning. So we'll probably get a different building there, which is a different size, not quite integrated with the neighborhood. I think some of the things we should have as requirements there are not there. You know, documenting the buildings before they're demolished and as they're demolished for archive, putting additional obligations on the property, if that's possible. But I think if we continue accepting demolition by neglect, we continue to lose the heritage that we have. So for this particular file, I will be voting no to not accept the demolition. I think there's other means and mechanisms to put in place to deal with it. But I think that has not been fully explored. But again, thank you for your time you put into this.
Thank you for your questions and your comments. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. Member Madigan's vote is legitimate. I'm personally going to hold my nose at the moral hazard that we continue to create. The practicalities of this situation are extreme, and I don't think it's pragmatic to refuse this demolition. But it, just exacerbates the moral hazard we create whenever we permit one of these demolitions in the case of demolition by neglect. One question, and then I just wanted to address Councillor Plant, or sorry, Vice Chair Plant's motion, or maybe I'll do that now. I think what you've done is to amend the motion such that the next iteration of building on this property would have to look like what is there currently. Okay. I would just suggest that that should be put as a separate motion. I don't support it. So I'd like to have the opportunity to vote on that one apart from the rest of the main body of the recommendation. So I would ask staff not to consider that friendly, but just separate it out.
Yep.
And then the final question I have, I received another note, I think it was from a Lower Town resident last night. In these cases, we hear a lot about expropriation, expropriate the property. Can I just ask, I think, once again, what the challenges are to expropriating these sorts of properties under the powers that we have under the Expropriations Act? Mr. Mark.
Chair, I see
Take your
that
time,
Mr.
please,
Mark
Mr.
is
Mark.
approaching the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. The difficulty is would there be the possibility of construing a municipal purpose for the expropriation of a heritage property? I would answer that question with yes, one could see that there is a municipal purpose in doing so. The concern that staff, both legal and, if I can be so bold, real estate, because of course I've discussed this matter with them, is that when a property is expropriated, the benefit of the doubt with respect to the potential of the property is always given to the expropriated property. Of course, it's being taken against their will, and so that is the approach that has historically been taken by the Ontario Land Tribunal and its predecessor bodies. And so one can look at a property and think that property is in poor shape. It certainly isn't worth very much, but that's not going to be the approach by the Ontario Land Tribunal. The Ontario Land Tribunal is going to think what could be built, what could be constructed on this site if that building was removed. And so such opens up a great uncertainty for the city as to what it will have to pay for that property at the end of the day. That has always been the concern of staff, Mr. Chair.
That value would be by statute market value?
Market value, Mr. Chair, as determined by the Ontario Land Tribunal, with the benefit of the doubt being given to the expropriated party.
So again, we have that situation where we reward bad actors. I'm not speaking particularly in this instance, but overall that would be a concern. In trying to demonstrate that there is a municipal purpose for the expropriation, do we have any master plans that speak to the use of this property? Is there a plan to put a community center on St. Patrick or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's I personally think it's a high bar simply to prove a municipal purpose, unless we were to expropriate it for the purpose of putting it into the hands of Ottawa Community Housing and saddling them with the bill of renovating that property. I do not see expropriation as a realistic path. Thank you very much, Mr. Mark. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. We're coming to the vote, but I know that there was an amendment. So do we have the amendment? The motion is still being worked on. So I'm just wondering if we have an ETA there for that.
Sorry, I'm trying to do a couple of things at once here. Just probably need like 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think then we will just briefly recess so we can come back to that series of votes. the main report. Is that report carried?
Carried.
Thank you so much. Sorry, with dissent from member Madigan. So that's been recorded. This report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on September 18th for consideration. The next item before us is application for demolition at 7 Crescent Road, a property designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act as part of the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. And we will have a presentation from staff on this item. Thank you. You can proceed.
Good morning, everyone. This is an application for demolition of the house and garage at 7 Crescent Road. Next slide, please. The property is located in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District and situated at the northern edge of the district. The property is a wedge shape with a narrow frontage along Crescent Road. The house is built into the landscape with limited views of the building from Crescent Road, however, opens up at the rear with expansive views over the Rockeries towards the Gatineau Hills. Note that the garage is positioned in front of the house as what you see in the left-hand image on the screen. Next slide, please. The house was constructed in 1970 by William Tarrant, a well-known local developer who was attributed with designing parts of Canada, earning him awards and accolades, including the Order of Canada. The house and garage were constructed in a modernist style with a regular plan, hexagonal forms, and low roofs. The buildings are wood frame structures clad in diagonal cedar siding. An addition was constructed in 1988 on the northwest side of the building. Based on the Heritage Survey forms for the property is considered a Grade 1 building, making it a contributing property within the Heritage Conservation District. Next slide. On June 23rd, 2024, a fire broke out in the house, severely damaging the building. Ottawa Fire Services were able to contain the fire, preventing any damage to the detached garage, neighboring houses, or landscape. The cause of the fire remains undetermined. According to the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District Plan, the demolition of a Grade 1 building is only permitted in extraordinary circumstances, such as fire or natural disaster. Property owners must provide a rationale as to why retention is not possible and may be asked for a report prepared by a structural engineer. An engineer report was completed by Roar Engineering dated July 26, 2024. Next slide, please. The report goes into depth into the condition of various elements of the building. I will highlight a few here. The structure as it currently stands is teetering in locations. Large steel beams are teetering within the potential to fall down stories below. Roof systems are hanging suspended in place, no longer able to support intended live or dead loading conditions. The superstructure materials have sustained smoke and water damage. Those materials will be assumed to be covered with asbestos fibers. Approximately 65% of the superstructure was consumed during the course of the fire, and partial wall structures remain standing in isolated locations. The cedar facade treatment are smoke and water damaged by the fire itself, and those remaining materials are beyond salvage due to the risk of contamination, bacteria, and asbestos. The full engineering report is included with the staff report. While the garage was not damaged during the fire, the positioning of the garage in front of the house with a narrow front yard makes accessing the house impossible. A large tree also sits in the middle of this courtyard, situated between the two buildings. In order to protect the tree, the garage will be demolished in order to provide access for equipment to dismantle the house. At this time, no new construction is being proposed as demolition is required in a timely manner. Next slide. For consultation, both Heritage Ottawa and the Rockcliffe Park Residents Association have been notified of the application and have submitted comments. Chair King was notified of the application, as were neighbors within 30 meters. Next slide. And finally, staff recommend approving the application to demolish as the building is in a severe state. We are also adding a condition similar to the last application here that the owner enter into an agreement with the city to maintain the property until such a time that new construction begins. And finally, staff have also included a recommendation to exempt the property from demolition control bylaw to allow for the quick dismantling of the building. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa on this item. We have a number of registered speakers, including first Hunter McGill, I believe, from Heritage Ottawa. Oh. Linda. Sorry about that, Linda Hode from Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you and good morning. He got here first and he didn't realize I had asked by email and had received my permission from the coordinator. So basically, we regret the tragic circumstance of this fire, which has created a dangerous situation and requiring the demolition of this important heritage property in the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. You will be hearing, I'm sure, from the Rockcliffe Park Community Association, who are very upset, understandably upset. And it's not the first loss of designated buildings or buildings in their designated Heritage Conservation District. What I wanted to bring to your attention was the question of whether or not the vacant property bylaw has been adhered to. In other words, did the building have or the property have a sign with the contact information for calling about complaints? It was the property being inspected bi-weekly to ensure that maintenance was being undertaken and the building was secure with a logbook. These are all the requirements of the vacant property bylaw, which some of you may not be aware of. It's a very important bylaw. It is one of the ways of protecting vacant buildings, heritage or not, because we need to identify them. And the city has, in theory, we have been told they have increased the number of property standards officers because there are fees involved in the permit process, as well as the vacant unit tax. I guess that goes to provide funds for housing. The vacant property bylaw fees are to increase inspection because we have a lot of vacant properties, as several of you have mentioned, and we need to make sure that they are being maintained, they are being boarded up, that fires cannot accidentally start, because fires are a danger to the entire community, not just to the building in question. It's something very serious. I was also going to suggest, I may have mentioned it in one of these others, perhaps when demolition permits are issued, the owner should be informed by whoever is issuing the permit. In this case, these heritage permits, the owner should be informed that they are required to apply for a permit for their now vacant land, because it includes land as well as buildings. So that was really, oh yes, I didn't want to say, I misunderstood. Are the, if no demolition permit is required, that means no demolition permit fees are being collected? Maybe you can ask the staff because I'm not allowed to. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation. You do have questions from Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I just wanted to make sure there are 23 people watching this Built Heritage Committee today, so I want to make sure that the information that's going out to the masses is correct. You mentioned the requirement to inspect the property every 2 weeks. I understand that that is a requirement, not on the part of the city, but on the part of the owner, that the owner has a requirement to visit the site every 2 weeks, and to be able to demonstrate, obviously, that they've been doing that. So we share that same understanding, which is good. For the 23 of you watching on YouTube this afternoon, it's not a requirement on the city to go inspect every 2 weeks. That's great. Thank you.
There are requirements for insurance. There's a lot, you should read the bylaw. It's really very interesting. It's one of my favorite bylaws, if not my favorite.
It is a comprehensive, it's a comprehensive list of requirements and yeah, I just didn't want a misperception to be out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Plant.
I just wanted to thank you for your delegation. I just had two questions. I also have an issue with some embassies. I'm not sure, sorry, I'm not sure if this one is an embassy. I don't remember. Okay. I have an issue with some embassies and some empty properties on adjacent to Councillor King's ward, but sorry, Chair King's ward in this case. And I would love to have maybe a chat with your community association at some point about this issue, because I do think there could be some more advocacy done about this, especially as we are in a housing crisis. And you did mention that the buildings are boarded up. Other than that being obviously unsightly and the risk of fires, are you having issues with things like squatters or some of the issues that we're also seeing with abandoned buildings?
I'm actually here speaking on behalf of Heritage Ottawa, but I live in Hintonburg, and where we don't have as much of an issue with squatters, although there certainly have been from time to time those kinds of issues. But the boarding up, yeah, it's a big issue.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation, as well as the advocacy of Heritage Ottawa. I know that the advocacy contributed to the revised bylaw, and I did reference it in an earlier item, but I think it is important just briefly to restate that it is new. We are undertaking a newer trajectory. You're absolutely right that owners are required to pay a fee of $1,703. That funds proactive inspections by 2 new dedicated bylaw officers. And the permit regime does apply to all buildings and lands that have been unoccupied for 120 days. To Councillor Leeper's point, he's absolutely correct. At the end of the day, it is the owner or their agents that must check their properties or visit their properties every 2 weeks to check for problems. And there ideally should be a fence and a phone number, and we've seen that in different properties. So we will ask that question of staff, or I'll ask that question of staff on your behalf. But thank you so much for the advocacy. It's one of my favorite bylaws too. I think we've made some progress, but we acknowledge that we need to do more as council, as committee, and as staff. The next speaker who's registered is Peter Hume on behalf of the owner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just, I think it's important to understand the backstory to 7 Crescent. Aside from the vacant property bylaw, which I can't speak to whether there was a sign, I can speak to some issues related to activities on the site. The site was secure, windows were in place, doors were locked, building systems were functioning, because it was the intent of the property owner to renovate and redevelop the site consistent with its heritage designation. They had retained Robinson Martin, respected heritage architect. They had developed plans. They had submitted plans to the city that had been reviewed. Those plans had been subject to a pre-consultation with the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Conservation District. The applicant or the owner had received comments. He was working through those comments. As you can appreciate, it's not easy to renovate a building. And this was a very particular building. The windows weren't windows as we would think. They were more plexiglass. So there were an awful lot of moving parts. So it was taking quite, I will say, it took quite a bit of time. But they were actively in the process of renovating and getting ready to rebuild and rehabilitate this structure. And so the fire was a surprise and a shock to them, because as I said, there were active people on site. The arborists were there cataloging all the trees. They had done extensive geotechnical work in the back on the slope. So there was lots of activity on the site. So that's how we knew it was the building was secure. There were no broken windows. It wasn't until the property appeared on an Instagram page and in the Ottawa Citizen that it became that all of a sudden it was a property that was known to be vacant. Now, I would like to draw a link between that and the fire, but I think that's a tangential link at best. But you know, shotgunning a vacant property all over Instagram is probably not a responsible thing to do. But that's beside the point. The point is there was a fire. The cause of that fire is undeterminate. And it was always and still is the applicant's intent to rehabilitate that structure and make it into a home consistent with the heritage properties. Everything that he did was consistent with the requirements of the district and the requirements of the city. And I'm sure Ashley can share those the plans that we submitted with you, because she's got copies of them and the comments that they provided. So this is a very difficult circumstance for the owner. And it's very unfortunate for the property. But it is not the same as the application that you have just debated and discussed. It's not property by neglect or demolition by neglect. And it's certainly not fire by neglect either. So I just want to be clear and so that the committee understands we're here because of a very unfortunate circumstance, but it was not by in any way, shape or form by design or lucky or convenient. In fact, it's quite inconvenient. The owner has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in investigation and in plans. And now that is all probably not salvageable. So he's now starting from the beginning after having invested significant time and effort in that. So, you know, not convenient for you, not convenient for Heritage, and not convenient for him.
Thank you for your comments. There are questions from Vice Chair Plant.
Hi, thank you for your delegation. I had two questions. So you mentioned that the property had appeared on a social media site. Did you or your client make any efforts to take that down? And then my second question is, I mean, you sort of alluded to it, but I'm thinking more long, big picture. What does that mean for the fire, what's happening today? What does it mean for the property going forward?
Well, it appeared on the social media site. It appeared, no one knew, the owner didn't know, appeared in the newspaper, and then there was the fire. So it happened very, very quickly. So, and what does the fire have relates to the redevelopment of the property? There will be a redevelopment of the property. It's going to be the owner's family home. We don't know what it means for the design and the investment that he's already made. Right now, he's dealing with the insurance companies and their requirements. So we're just trying to get through that at this point.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for your comments and your answers. We appreciate them. The next registered speaker is Michelle Heyman from the Rockcliffe Park Heritage Committee. Thank you.
I won't repeat myself, you heard me. The RPRA has struggled with this file. Sadly, it is clear. Let's start over. The RPRA has struggled with this file. Sadly, it is clear through the engineering report and visual inspection, this house should be demolished for the safety of the community. The city, however, is losing a significant part of architectural history. This was a home designed by William Tarrant and the mastermind architect of Old Canada, now being considered for heritage designation. This home was designed for his family to live in and is an excellent example of modern architecture based on a hexagonal grid with beautiful vistas of the rockeries framed by paneless horizontal glass that allows a beautiful flow of light through the whole house. Yet again, this in effect has become demolition by neglect, one of many this year throughout the city. This house has been vacant for many years before the Heritage Watch List existed and before the current owner purchased it. The fire likely would not have happened, or the damage would not have been as significant if the house had not been vacant. As a solution, perhaps in addition to the vacancy tax, there could be a heritage tax break, which comes into effect when the owner restores heritage properties. The City of Toronto has had a heritage tax rebate program where eligible residential properties receive a 40% rebate on their property taxes. This would make heritage properties desirable. Instead, a fire seems like an easy solution to the high cost of restoration or redevelopment. If perhaps any previously proposed designs that may have been presented were not acceptable, the fire would give the owner the benefit of being able to develop the property from scratch. So not only does the city lose a valued heritage building, but the owner now gets insurance money to develop a brand new house. For this reason, we are most shocked by the staff recommendation that the demolition fees be waived. We asked staff to explain the rationale behind this. Will the city then waive heritage and development fees when a new design is put forward? We ask, how does this action protect heritage in Rockcliffe Park? The owner needs to conserve the heritage of Rockcliffe Park, a national heritage site, in accordance with the standards of guidelines for historic conservation in Canada. The standards repeatedly discuss replacement in kind for any elements that are too damaged to be repaired. I quote, replacing in kind an entire constructed element that is too deteriorated to repair using physical and documentary evidence as a model of reproduction. The new work should match the old as closely as possible in form, materials, and detailing. We strongly urge the committee not to waive the demolition fees and to require the owner to replace in kind the structure before any further development be considered. This would act as a strong message that demolition by neglect does not provide the owner any benefits. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you so much for your delegation. I don't see any questions, so thank you.
Okay.
For the committee, questions to staff. Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. Is there any obligation for when a heritage building burns down to rebuild it in kind from the city, or?
As per the Rockcliffe Park HCD plan guidelines, demolition of a building is not, when a new construction is proposed, is not required to replicate or rebuild the demolished building.
And there's no obligation to rebuild a heritage building that gets destroyed by fire.
Can you repeat that, please?
There's no obligation to rebuild a heritage building that's destroyed by fire.
That's correct.
So it'll be more of an obligation perhaps on the part of the insurance, I guess, which is a separate discussion.
Yeah, I can't speak to that, sorry. I'm not sure.
I don't want you to speak to that.
Yeah.
I just don't like for my own insurance policy, sort of, the context is they will build in kind if my house burnt down, but that's what the insurance company, which is whatever your policy is written.
Maybe if I could just add to that, Member Madigan, while there is no requirement to rebuild it in kind under the Ontario Heritage Act, if the owner wished to do that, if their insurance permitted, full replacement in kind, then that would be an option that would be available to them, but it's not a requirement.
Understood. That's there's lots of debates about insurance, which is a big debate about people having difficulty getting insurance, but a lot of insurance is generally based on replacing what's lost. But that's something separate, obviously, here. One other aspect, is there any requirement to perhaps document the house further and put that into an archive as part of the process?
since this building was built in 1970, we actually have the plans for the house, the original plans, already on file. So those can be sent to the archives. We also do have some photos pre-fire that will be deposited in the archives. Given the state of the building and the danger of going inside and being on site, we have not included a recommendation for this in this case. The plan for Rockcliffe does typically require this, but given the severity of the damage and the danger of being there, we've not included in this case.
Understood. It's maybe something to consider that any sort of documentation reports, additional photographs of demolition might be aspects to conserve and put together as part of an archive, maybe if not for this one, for future projects like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Madigan. I don't see any other hands raised. So I did promise to ask the question on behalf of Heritage Ottawa around bylaw enforcement services intervention around this vacant property. So I just wanted to ask whether a fence was erected with a sign as enumerated under the vacant property bylaw.
Jen Thurgelson is still on the line from Bylaw and Regulatory Services, so I'll refer the question to her.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. This property has been in non-compliance for some time. As a result, we have several prosecutions before the courts. There is a fence in place after the fire. However, the contact notice is still not on the property.
And can we either speak to the process or the specific case as to why a fence was not put in place with a sign?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. So the process is, a part of the commitment when the vacant property bylaw was initiated and enacted was that our officers would do proactive inspections, secondary to what's in the actual bylaw in terms of requirements on the property owner. To Councillor Leaper's points earlier, in relation to this property specifically, we still do not have an active vacant property permit on file, which is kind of the initiation of much of the rest of the regulatory regime located in the bylaw. As a result, so there are several prosecutions before the court systems in relation to a non-compliant owner.
Well, we do have this bylaw for a reason. And I think we want to ensure that in all cases, we really pursue it with vigor. I think it's an important first step. And I know that there will be different unique issues for every unique situation. But it's obviously the will of council to ensure that we have these mechanisms put into place for all vacant properties. I know bylaw enforcement services will continue to work towards that goal, but anytime that's not done, in my estimation, it is a failure. So I think we definitely need to do better in terms of the way that we work with the vacant property owners and also the way that we interface with the community around these issues. But we acknowledge that this is a relatively new bylaw. It's we're implementing things now, so there are going to be growing pains. But I think the expectation from the community is full compliance with the items as enumerated under the bylaw. But I thank bylaw enforcement services for the work that they do. Those were my questions and comments. Are there, seeing that there are no other comments, is this item carried? Carried. Thank you so much. The next item that we have is a designation of 123 Metcalfe Street under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We do have registered speakers and a presentation from staff.
Good morning. So I'll be speaking on the designation of 123 Metcalf Street, the former YMCA and current Metcalf Hotel. Next slide, please. So the subject property is a 5-story red brick building located at the intersection of Metcalf Street and Laurier Avenue in downtown. It has frontage on both streets, and for context, it's located directly across the street from the Central Public Library. Next slide, please. So the subject property meets 6 of the 9 criteria for designation under the Ontario Heritage Act. It was constructed in 1909 as the second building for the Ottawa YMCA. The Ottawa Y was originally established in 1867, primarily as a religious and service organization. But by the early to mid 20th century, the YMCA's kind of mission had evolved, and it became an important community organization in Ottawa, largely known for its social, educational, and also athletic programming. So the building at 123 Metcalf has design value as a representative example of a purpose-built 20th century YMCA building, featuring elements of the Italianate, Edwardian, and Renaissance Revival architectural styles. The building was designed by the New York architectural firm Jackson and Rosencrantz, who were known for their designs of YMCAs across Canada and the northeastern United States. The building was also designed in association with notable Ottawa architect John Albert Ewart, who likely served as the local expert in association with the international firm for kind of local and contextual details, which was a common practice for YMCA designs at the time. So the building is distinctly identifiable as an early 20th century YMCA, and it bears a lot of similarity with other YMCAs across North America, particularly those in Canada and the northeastern United States, and in many ways is an early and prototypical example of the sort of standard YMCA design that would become common across North America in that early 20th century pre-World War I period. Particularly, the design sort of reflects a lot of the programming shifts that happened at the YMCA as they shifted towards more secular and often athletic-based programming. Important to note as well that the property has significant potential to yield new information on the experiences of Ottawa's queer communities in the early and mid 20th centuries. So YMCAs are known internationally and traditionally as a queer-friendly sort of space. And while there's limited historic documentation on these communities' presence at the Ottawa YMCA specifically, local experts, scholars, and community members have speculated that there are connections between early 20th century 2S LGBTQ+ communities and this building. So further research and work on this property may yield new and significant information on the history of these communities in Ottawa. And next slide, please. So the building at 123 Metcalf also has contextual value because it's historically and functionally linked to its surroundings. It was central to a sort of cluster of institutional and civic buildings, including the former Carnegie Library, the former YWCA, and former Masonic Temple, which were all located at this intersection. This reflects a lot of the clustering of civic and institutional buildings in the early 20th century, which contributed to establishing Uppertown as Ottawa's sort of central business district. It's also located directly on Metcalf, which is a historic kind of thoroughfare that connects Parliament Hill to the landmark Victoria Memorial, or now Nature Museum. So to conclude, this property has cultural heritage value for its design, associative, and contextual values, meeting 6 of the 9 criteria for designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. We did receive correspondence from Heritage Ottawa on this item, and we do have 2 registered speakers, starting with Jack Hanna from the Centertown Community Association. Thank you for joining us, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I am the chair of the Centertown Community Association's Heritage Committee, and we're enthusiastically 100% behind this designation. About a year ago, the city's Heritage Branch sent us a list of some 50 properties in Centertown that are candidates for heritage designation. The Heritage Branch asked us to identify our priorities. Now, we put some effort into this. We created a big survey asking people to rank the heritage value of each building. We sent this out to our membership, tabulated the responses, and produced a top 10 list, which we provided to the Heritage Branch. This building, 123 Metcalf, was at the top of that list. Of the 50-some buildings in Centertown that could be designated, this is our #1 top priority. It's a beautiful building. The facades are visually lively and interesting. It is in pristine condition, very well maintained. The location is prominent on a major corner in the heart of Ottawa, and that corner is very open, so the building is very well displayed. As you approach this corner from any direction, your eye goes to the Met. Of course, yeah, it was the YMCA in Ottawa for 61 years, almost 2/3 of a century. It played a huge part in the lives of countless Ottawans from all walks of life. It was a community gathering place, both as the Y and in its many iterations as a hotel. And there is written documentation of the significance of the Y at 123 Metcalfe for the gay community over many very difficult decades. Finally, I'd like to applaud the owners of heritage buildings who work so hard to maintain them. That's true at 123 Metcalfe. The building comes down to us in magnificent condition because owner after owner after owner respected its heritage and beauty. Generations of owners kept the faith. Now it's your turn. It's your honor and privilege to help conserve this beautiful heritage building, which so vibrantly speaks to the architectural history of Ottawa. Generations of owners at 123 Metcalfe have kept the faith, and now, right here today, you get to keep the faith. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your delegation. I know that Councillor Troster has either questions or comments for you.
Hi, Jack. Thank you for your enthusiastic delegation and also for the hard work you do, as chair of the CCA's planning committee. Jack has his hands in a lot of files, and I always appreciate your counsel. I'm just curious, do you know more about the queer history of this Y building? Because I was completely fascinated by the staff report because I actually didn't know about this. And I know there's rumors. Are there historians working on this that I should read? Like, did you discover stuff that I don't know about?
I haven't got the website reference here in front of me, but if you Google, it's the village history, the word village in the title of the website, and it's a history project of the village on Somerset Up Bank. And it's, yeah, there's a few paragraphs there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, something we know about the Lord Elgin too, that was also a gathering for gay men. It was actually a site of surveillance during the LGBTQ purge, right? So all of this history is really fascinating, relevant to Ottawa. But thank you so much for your advocacy, for your dedication. I'm also really excited to see this building up for designation. It's a no-brainer for me. And it is really wonderful to see it's been kept in such beautiful condition. That's exceptionally rare. So it's a real jewel. And I appreciate your enthusiasm. We like to make you happy, Jack, you and the Community Association.
And we also have questions from Vice Chair Plant.
Hi, sort of a bit parallel to all this. Thank you also for the historical and sort of analysis that you've given on this site. I'm nominating someone named Paul Fournier, who was Peaches Latour. He lived in my ward as Ottawa's first drag queen and was part of the purges. So I would love to have a chat with you after, if it's okay, we could follow up together because sure. I'm completely fascinated by all this. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Member Madigan.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned you have sent a survey around to your community to ask them to nominate, their top heritage buildings. Is that unusual for the heritage communities in Ottawa, or is that like a typical practice?
We work hard on heritage. For example, we're talking with the Heritage Branch about City Council approved it as part of their work plan for the coming year. They're going to look at 2 new heritage districts in Centertown. One in West Centertown, sort of from Kent Street over to Bronson in that area, and in the Golden Triangle from Elgin to the Canal. We conducted 6 walking tours last spring, where up to 15, 18 people walked around, and we gave them a survey form, and we asked them to rank the heritage value of each half block, right? So between Percy and Bay on Somerset, north side, south side. And before we did that, we asked Leslie's department to give us a presentation saying, okay, I'm standing on a block in West Centertown. How do I think about its heritage value? What criteria do I use? They did an excellent presentation to us to help us with that task. They said, how well does that street you're standing on, that block, tell the heritage story of this neighborhood? And that was their key message to us. But so I think 29 people participated in the walks, and we did it over like 2 months, every Saturday. So we put a lot of effort in this, and we look forward to continuing to work with Leslie and her staff, with whom we have an excellent working relationship, really top quality conversations. We look forward to working with them to develop the two new heritage districts the City Council asked them to develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's an aspect of, it's the citizens identifying what the buildings are, not necessarily the specialists. I'm a specialist, but it's hearing the regular people of the community going around and saying, this is what we think is the heritage value of these buildings is, I think, very important. And revealing the history of this building, I think I walk by quite often. I work downtown within a block of this building. I always wondered what it was, and now I know it's a YMCA, and there's even more history to that with the unwritten history of the gay community, which I've been to other presentations, and there's aspects of the history of the gay community because it was secret is being lost because people don't know about it. But as part of lots of different histories, it should get more widely understood and documented. So thank you very much, and thank you to staff for putting together a report.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Councillor Troster.
I can attest to this walking tours because I walked out to take my recycling one day and I was still in my pajamas and there was Jack Hanna and 20 Centertown residents with clipboards saying, Ariel, how do we tell the story of your street? I was like, just give me a minute. But no, I just like the degree of community engagement on heritage in Centertown is really, really inspiring. And, I really love that our move to develop new heritage districts truly is citizen led. Like it's coming from community demanding this and also just like learning more about heritage attributes and learning how to identify them ourselves. I just think it's great. So thank you again to you and to the CCA, Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation, and I echo Councillor Troster's sentiments. We have one last registered speaker, David Jeans.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? I'm speaking.
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm speaking in person and also representing the Ottawa Welsh Society, of which I'm vice president. My family arrived in Ottawa at the end of 1957, and in 1958 and 1959, the Y was my go-to place every Saturday morning. In fact, Metcalfe Street was the place to go. You not only had the Y and the YWCA, the library across the street, but such a short walk to the Victoria Museum, which at that date housed the National Gallery, the History Collection, and the Museum of Nature. So it was my life as a young teenager. So I'm very enthusiastic about that. With respect to the gay history, I don't know whether this is relevant, but the policy for swimming at the Y was no bathing suits. So take that as you will. And that also applied at Hart House at the University of Toronto. So it wasn't unique to this Y. But the Welsh Society was founded in 1919 at a meeting at the YMCA. And that's documented in the Ottawa Journal and is an important part of the history of our society, which has operated ever since, except for a 10-year break related to the Second World War. I think that this building not only has civic significance, I think it has national significance. The YMCA was established as a national organization in 1912, though it had been in Canada since 1851. And the Toronto Y and Montreal Ys, downtown Ys, were both built in 1912 and have both been demolished. The Toronto Y in 1985 and the Montreal Y in 2002. I knew both buildings, so I think that's quite significant. The report also mentions the importance of the founding of Carleton University, and on the national scale, the YMCA in North Toronto was responsible for founding York University, and the Montreal downtown YMCA was responsible for founding Concordia University. So that also is a national element. So I'm very strongly in favor of this, and architecturally, it's still a beautiful building. Obviously, it no longer has the interior. I just wanted to mention that it did have a bowling alley in the basement at one time. And in addition to the 2 gyms and swimming pool, it had a lecture hall at one time, and I believe even a rifle range in the basement. And the Chuck Wagon restaurant, which replaced the original locker room area, was the go-to place to buy hot dogs. So in any case, I enthusiastically support this recommendation, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you why.
We appreciate your comments and you know, the history, the rich history being recounted through your delegation. So appreciative of your comments. I don't see any questions. Are there any questions to staff or committee? Seeing none, is the report carried?
Carried.
Thank you so much. So this report will be submitted to Ottawa City Council on September 18th for consideration. Our next item is the Heritage Registrar Removal Report for 2024. There is no presentation, but this item has been held as Heritage Ottawa is registered to speak to it. And thank you, Linda, for joining us once again. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I just wanted well, since it was written in the report, we do appreciate the detailed tracking of these removals, however unfortunate, from the Heritage Register. However, it just occurred to me when I was looking over this report, it's another chance to talk about my favorite bylaw. I think it's an opportunity. I don't know whether staff have considered this because the bylaw is relatively new, but of the remaining properties that have been removed but have not actually been demolished, how many of them are currently vacant and how many are adhering to the vacant property bylaw? So again, it would be an opportunity for staff to inform people that since they own a vacant property, whether or not, vacant building, and then possibly a vacant property. So really, it's just another opportunity for me to talk to you about my favorite bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we appreciate those comments. Are there questions to staff? So if there are not, I actually will follow up with that comment from Heritage Ottawa around whether, and I'll just post a question, whether we cross-reference vacant properties with the removals report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have not done that, but we can follow up with our colleagues in Bylaw and Regulatory Services. I believe that Jen is no longer on the call and she wouldn't have that information immediately at our fingertips, but the properties that are being recommended for removal have all been demolished. So these would be vacant pieces of land. In some instances, and I think in some instances, they probably already have new construction on them. So we can take that away and follow up with bylaw.
I appreciate that. And yeah, we definitely would love to hear back on that. I think any tool that we can leverage that we have to improve the quality of properties should be pursued. So thank you for that. Seeing that there are no other questions to staff, is this report carried? Carried. Excellent. So this report will also be submitted to council on September 18th for their consideration. There are no in-camera items. Any notices of motion? Seeing none. Inquiries? No inquiries. Is there any other business? Seeing none. On adjournment. Are we adjourned? Adjourned. Thank you. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. Thank you so much, everybody.